Hi guys, this podcast is focusing on Chicago, one of the world's great cities, and we're going to use the world to understand Chicago a little better. The major question that we're addressing is, what are the major events that have made Chicago what it is today? So this is very simple for you to take notes on. In your class book, when you see the pictures I'm about to show you, all you have to do is make a few notes to remind yourself about what the picture indicates is important for the history of Chicago. And to help me do this today, I have my husband sitting here beside me.
Hi guys, I'm Chris Bazinski, Terry's husband.
And I'm making him sit here so that you don't have to just listen to me talk, and also because he's agreed to ask me questions when I'm unclear or tell me to not go so slowly, because sometimes I go off on tangents because I do love Chicago. So, okay guys, here's your first slide. You know what this is?
I just see an ugly guy in the right-hand corner.
He's not ugly. That's Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable.
He looks like a diseased Mr. Lincoln.
No. He is Chicago's first non-native resident.
Really?
And what you're looking at right here is an incredibly cool picture, actually. This is the river coming into Lake Michigan. And today, if you could see what
The Chicago River?
Yeah, the Chicago River coming into Lake Michigan. And today, if you could imagine this, Michigan Avenue is just on the other side of where DuSable's cabin is there. See the little cabin?
Yeah.
And obviously there's a lot of buildings there today too, but
DuSable was a very small man.
I've never heard exactly what size he was, but
is that an Indian village right there on the left?
Yes, it is, and that is not true to what was really going on. So the Indian tribe that was here was the Potawatomi. And the truth is that there's absolutely no way they would ever have put their teepees where you see them in this picture. They thought that DuSable was insane for putting his cabin right where he did, because this was a marsh. It was mosquito infested, it smelled bad, and in fact that's why they called it Chicago, which means place of the stinking onion. And they weren't going to put their teepees here. I mean, it was a nasty place to live. Their teepees were way out further on the prairie. But the illustrator, I think, probably wanted to show DuSable was very friendly with the Potawatomi Indians. And in fact, where it shows his cabin is accurate. And as smelly and as marshy and mosquito infested as this location was, it was brilliant on DuSable's part. Do you have any idea why he got rich with his cabin right there?
I have no idea.
Okay, well, it's because there are no highways, there are no railroads out here at this time. So the rivers and the lakes are they're the only way to transport anything. So if you were somebody with goods you were trying to sell and you were transporting them from one part of the United States to another part, you had to come on this waterway and you had to pass his cabin. And there weren't that many people out here, so you would stop to do a little trading. And he traded furs, and he became so wealthy that he actually had a piano in his little cabin.
Huh. Now, would that cabin have been a log cabin? Where would the logs have come from? Wouldn't it have been some kind of sod cabin like the early pioneers built?
Nobody's ever asked me that before, and I don't actually know the answer. I'm sorry.
Caught you.
'Cause there aren't that many trees around here, and I know that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, let's go on. All right, because DuSable was so successful here, within a very short time, the government decided this would be a good place for a fort. Do you know what fort that is?
Dearborn.
That's right, good. Fort Dearborn. And we still, to commemorate Fort Dearborn, we still have Dearborn Avenue downtown in Chicago. So this was across from where his little cabin was. And they patrolled the waterways just to, they realized this was a strategic location, wanted control of it. The problem was they started to prohibit the Potawatomi's use of the river. And the Potawatomi didn't appreciate that at all. And so pretty soon the relationship between the non-native residents and the natives became really, really hostile. And in fact, do you know about the massacre at Fort Dearborn?
No.
Oh, this was Chicago's first big tragedy. There were families living in the fort, and things had gotten tense enough between the people living in Fort Dearborn and the natives that the people were pretty sure the natives were going to attack. So they actually sent their families, their wives and their children, down the lake. So they walked straight south along the lake and then headed straight, I think it was east, out onto the prairie to try to get away from the attack. And that night, sure enough, the natives came and they attacked the fort. They burned it down. They killed every single guy who was there. And when they didn't find the families, they went after them. And they actually killed almost all of the people.
They caught them on the prairie.
They caught them on the prairie. In fact, just a couple years ago, they actually found the location, and they started digging up the bones and treating it like an archaeological dig. Yeah. Huh. Although there were a few people who bought their lives, who paid the Indians not to kill them and survived. But yeah, but it was a nasty thing. The Potawatomi, of course, won the battle but not the war, and all that happened was they just rebuilt the fort. And in this illustration, you can see you've got some natives there on the river, and you can also see the really sort of piecemeal way that buildings are going up all around here. Mm. And this shows, where the Chicago River kind of turns and moves out toward Lake Michigan. Well, that's what you're seeing here, and a lot of the people had their houses right here on the river. Wow. Because, it makes sense to have your
Who did these drawings?
Again, no one's ever asked me that before. I don't know. I'm not sure that anybody does know. Huh. That's a good question. So this area right here in the front of the picture was called Wolf Point, though, and this is where evidently the bars and the brothels. This was like the rowdy part of town right here. So today the merchandise mart is right here in this area. Okay, so that was when Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable put his cabin there. That was like 1779. Well, now it's about 80 years later, and Chicago has become what is called a boom town. There are so many people here who are getting rich because of its location on the waterways that they're just moving here by the hundreds. And Chicago, because it's a marsh, it's a boggy marsh, is a huge, muddy, smelly area with one wood building right next to the next wood building. And what you see in this picture is what some of the storekeepers have done to try to get out of the mud. You see how some of them have treated their first floor almost like
built up decks.
Yeah, and they built up decks. Well, that's because in the spring, when it was raining a lot, the mud would sometimes be 1 to 2 feet thick on the roads. It was awful. And it's partly because, well, it's almost entirely because the water table here is so high. So when it rains, there's nowhere for the water to go. And it was also disease infested, and there was no place for sewage to go, for example. So this time of the year, yeah, it was a nasty place. People would get cholera, which is a disease that's caused when you get sewage into your drinking water.
So why didn't they pave the streets?
There was no. This is well before paving. This is well before. Not. Yes, it is.
Benjamin Franklin had the streets of Philadelphia paved.
They were cobblestones.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Why didn't they pave them with cobblestones?
Well, I don't think it would have done a whole lot of good because the water table is right there at street level.
It's so muddy.
So what a lot of them did is what you see here. They just built up from the street, and they built all of these wooden boardwalks so that people could get up and away from the mud.
Boy, what a filthy mess.
I know. You want to hear a really dumb joke they used to tell?
Sure.
Okay. So the joke goes that a man has come to Chicago for the first time, and the streets are so muddy that the people on the boardwalk look out and all they can see is his head, sticking up above the mud. And they call down to him, "Hey, fellow, do you need some help?" And he calls back, "Oh, no, I've got a fine horse beneath me." Okay, it's not that funny. But they thought it was really funny because it was, making of the point that there's a lot of money.
I get it.
Okay, all right. So this is actually a really serious problem, though, because really hundreds and hundreds of people die every spring because of sewage in their drinking water because there's nowhere for the water to go.
I see.
Okay, so what did they do? Do you know what they did?
Wow, it looks like they lifted this whole building up a whole street.
They did. This is the first of Chicago's incredibly crazy, sort of Herculean, like Hercules, Herculean tasks that they did. They decided, since we can't cause the water to go any lower, we'll raise the city up higher. So there was a man named George Pullman. You've heard of him before?
Yes.
He invented.
Wasn't he the railroad?
Yeah,
man?
well, later on. He got rich because he invented a system for lifting up all the buildings with these little
Oh,
these
like
little
little
cranks,
jacks.
those jacks. They're yeah. And so all around, they'd put all these jacks all around the base of these buildings. This was the old Briggs house. It was a hotel. And somebody would count out 1, 2, 3, and on 3, everybody would turn it half a turn. And they lifted this building, and many buildings, 12 feet off the ground.
Really?
Yeah.
So if somebody was sleeping on the job, you'd have one sort of corner of the building sagging.
That would have been a problem. And it would have been an especially significant problem because the people who owned these buildings didn't like the idea of closing them down, while they lifted them. So they actually left these buildings open while they were raising them off the ground. See the people at the hotel?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. There are people in the hotel.
Yeah.
They're having their little breakfast.
Yeah.
It's
And
hilarious.
this is also vintage Chicago because people came to Chicago for one reason only. And it wasn't the beauty of the lake, and it wasn't our tropical weather. It wasn't for a lot of the reasons people go to other places. It wasn't our culture. People came here because they wanted to get rich. So money is the big draw for Chicago, and that becomes a theme throughout Chicago's history. It's our vulnerable thing because, we're prone to corruption, which of course is not a problem today. No, it continues to be a problem today. So money is really at the heart of a lot of Chicago's history. Okay, go on ahead. That's George Pullman. He's the guy who invented the system for lifting the city up. And he got so rich from this that he opened the sleeping car business. And that's probably where you've heard of him before.
Oh, sleeping cars, right.
Yeah. Okay, this is the last thing we're doing for this particular little episode, but we're now to about 1865. So this is about 10 years after they raised the streets up. And because Chicago has become the central location where all the traffic for goods, comes through Chicago as they're moving goods from one part of the country to another. So it just makes sense to make all of the meat packing places in Chicago. So all the people who are, trying to butcher pigs and cattle and lambs and everything else.
They're being transported through Chicago,
Yeah,
too?
they bring their animals to Chicago where they're slaughtered in the stockyards. And then they're chopped up and put into the boats, and then by this time actually the trains too, because now there are train tracks here too.
Which probably didn't help the smell of the city.
Oh my gosh, it was awful. It was horrible. Anyway, so the stockyards opened in 1865, and they were a world phenomenon. I mean, people came from all over the world to see Chicago stockyards, if you can imagine this.
Didn't they throw some of the bodies in the river and stuff like that?
Yeah. Let me show you this next one too. Okay,
Wow.
That's an aerial view of the stockyards. You can see the little animals in the little pens. It's a huge area. There had never been a place this big, and it smelled atrocious, and it was kind of horrifying because you're killing millions and millions of animals every year. And yes, they dumped a lot of body parts into the river. It was not like, they weren't very environmentally aware. But it was also, the stockyards was what gave Henry Ford his idea for the assembly line.
Oh, I see.
So he came and he saw how they were disassembling all the animals, And I'm actually going to show a clip from the stockyards in class, but I'll warn people they may want to close their eyes because it's gruesome.
Isn't that gateway to the stockyard that we showed before, isn't that still around?
Yeah, it is. It's down by University of Illinois.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, and a lot of the kids have probably seen some of these pictures before because they've read Pieces of the Jungle. I'll bet some of you recognize this. These were the workers in the stockyards, and this was one nasty job. I mean, it was dangerous because there were so many, sharp objects. People lost fingers and hands, and sometimes body parts ended up in the meat. I mean, there were rats everywhere. There was disease. It was a nasty, nasty place to work. So bad that, I always forget, Upton Sinclair or Sinclair Lewis. It's
Upton Sinclair
wrote The Jungle to advertise just what a horrific place it was to work. And in fact, Teddy Roosevelt was president, and he read The Jungle, and he could not believe that it was really this awful. He thought that Upton Sinclair was exaggerating. So Upton Sinclair challenged Teddy Roosevelt to come out and see for himself. And to his credit, Teddy did. He came out, and when he saw how bad it was, he instituted some of the first regulations on business.
Sounds like Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
I don't know if he was a good guy. But
He was a good guy.
They didn't say that in Panama when he built the Panama
All
Canal.
right, all right. All right, what you see here are all the railroads which has now been built, and they all come into the stockyards. So it's really easy just to chop up the animals, put them into the cars, and ship them out to every place in America. And if you've ever seen, to this day, if you've ever seen a map of all the railroads in Chicago, it looks like Chicago's the spoke of a wheel, and the railroads go everywhere. It's still. So it was efficient for a long time to do this. Okay, so question. Can you figure out what caused the stockyards to close? They finally closed in 1971, totally. What was their...
1971?
I know, they were around till 1971. They got smaller and smaller. But what caused this not to be the most efficient system anymore?
I don't know, trucking?
Exactly.
Really?
The interstate. By by early 1970s, the interstates
cars.
and refrigerator, right, exactly. Okay, and that brings us to the end of our first history of Chicago and the world. Thanks, guys.
That was great. Thanks, guys.
Humanities Online. That's all, folks.